Have you found it confusing making double knit stockinette? There's so many different ones around. Well, today we're going to compare 6 different ones, why you would use them, the differences, and actually how to make each one of them. Stay tuned and we'll solve that today. Welcome to GoodKnit Kisses. We're all about helping you stitch your love and love your stitches. I love double knitting on the knitting loom. It's much easier than using needles because you can see it working up as you go and you can make modifications really easily. So I want to cover what I'm working with today. I'm working with a double rake loom. This is from Knitting Board. So I have an upper and a lower board. You can use any shape from any brand, whether it's called a long loom or a knitting board, an S-shaped loom, any of them that have pairs of pegs. I'm using a super bulky 6-weight yarn. You can use other yarns, that's fine. In fact, you want to test these in multiple weights of yarns. The setting between the two boards, if you're able to do it, I've got mine at the 2 centimeter setting. You can do it at 1 to 3 and test the different ones to see what you get. I wanted to see what the thickest one was without going too far. So this is 2 centimeter setting on the 28-inch knitting board. For more information, go click on our blog down below and you can see more details written out for your reference. I'm going to be comparing and contrasting these in the very beginning of the video, so you do want to stay through here, especially the first time. Go ahead and watch through the video the first time, and then towards the end, we're going to have some demonstrations of each stitch. So just to overview, when you're looking at these visually, all the ones that have the blue are using traditional V-shaped stitches. Okay, there is no twisting or E-wrapping. These here are all E-wrapping or making that twisted stitch. Okay, so we are working with 6 samples. It looks like 5. This sample right here is actually 2 of them together. You can see where I've got this different anchor yarn here just showing the difference. You can see there's very striking difference on here. It looks twisted, but it's not. Okay, let's cover the first ones that you need to know. This is stockinette. The one on the left is a classic stockinette. Whenever you see it set up, you see it running every other peg, and then you pick up the missed pegs on your way back. It's the same one with this one, except this one is using a twisted stitch or E-wrap stitch. So we're going to call this Stockinette Classic and Stockinette E-wrap. That's really the difference between the two. They make a nice thick fabric. You don't pull it apart too much. It does have a little bit of give. It would be something nice for a very thick blanket or a warm coat or jacket. Okay. These over here are modifications. 2 of these, this one and this one, which you'll see in a moment, are more of a brioche stitch. They have a look like stockinette. The one you're most familiar with is this one right here. This is what a lot of people call the figure 8 or twisted stockinette. Okay, we're going to talk about them like this is actually both stockinette, and we're going to call this a stockinette figure 8, and this one is the twisted figure 8. Okay, so it's a modified version. There is no slip stitch in this one. And what happens is when we wrap, we're going to wrap both of them in one direction, and that gets 1 row. That's on both of these, actually on this one down here too. You wrap them up, and then when you come back on the next pass, if you use a slip stitch where you ignore the very first stitch, you can actually line up the wraps. So you're going to be lining them up in one direction, just like the row before. If you don't line them up and make sure they cross over, it actually makes this one. Here's the difference between the fabrics that they make. So when I pull apart this fabric, it looks different than when I pull apart this fabric. Let's look at the one that you've seen before, likely. When you pull this apart, you can actually see your fingers through it. It has this ladder yarn and everything. When I go over here and I pull it apart, I can't see my fingers through it. I actually can see the back of the knit stitch from the back board. I can see that little purl stitch peeking through. So it's not as thick as this over here, but I get the benefit of not being able to see through my stitches. Do you see that? So if you have been frustrated with this one, move to this one. So it's not super thick, but you still get that benefit. Okay, the way to do that, you'll see how to wrap it. Basically, this one here has no stitch on the first one. You're going to do a slip stitch. Down here on this one, this is called the zigzag. The zigzag is down below here. Everything is wrapped all in one direction, just like the figure 8. except it's not twisted around the loom. It's just simply going over. So we're going to go back in the other direction and it will cross itself. The wrapping pattern does not line up. The wrapping pattern does line up when you decide to not use the first stitch, which is slipping it, and you make this duplicate zigzag pattern. All right, let's go through and show you how to actually make these stitches. So now we're ready to cover how to wrap. And I'm not going to be covering the cast on in these, but I will refer to them. So in the cast on this particular one, this is the stockinette, we're going to start our wrapping with this upper peg. Okay, so we're going to wrap around this upper peg. It's the first one. Okay, so if you were starting, you would start with the slip knot on your first row in cast ons. You just take the slip knot and put it here. So it always ends on this lower peg on number 1. So I'm starting my wrapping on number 1 upper, and then I'm going to go down to the even peg on the lower one. So we're just going to wrap around. Now I'm not twisting or anything, I'm just simply going around. So around the second one, then we're going to go up to the third peg, so the odd on the upper board. So we're going to all the odds on the upper and all the evens on the lower, and we just wrap all the way around them. I'm doing 12 pairs of pegs on all my samples, and I get down to the 12th peg, okay, and then I'm going to go straight up and wrap around and then come down, and now I'm going to pick up all the odd pegs on the lower and pick up all the evens on the upper. Now in other videos you will see recommended, a particular company likes to recommend turning your board around. It's too much for me. I don't like continuing to move my board and turn it around. So I'm just going to wrap it this way today. All right, so I've picked them all up. I'm going to go down to the very last one. I still wrap around that because I want a loop on every single one of my pegs. Okay, so I'm going to lift the bottom one up and over and knit that off. And now it's locked in. I don't have to worry about it. And I'm just going to knit off from left to right and stop in the middle. And I'm just doing the front of the board. Okay, and then I'm going to go from right to left and knit off. And you can vary where you end this middle, the center portion. You can go 1 stitch over every other row or so, just so that you don't get a center line down the middle. And then I'm going to turn it and look at the upper board and knit those over. You can turn the whole board around. I'm just turning it downward to see it instead of flipping it around. It's whatever you prefer. And then we're just going to push it down, and we've made 1 row. To do the next row, it's exactly the same because we have still ended on this end. So we're just going to wrap it the same way. We start with the 1 peg and then go down to the 2 on the lower and go back and forth exactly how we did before. There's nothing different about it. And that's it on the Stockinette Classic. For the Stockinette Ewrap, it's the same thing as the Stockinette Classic, except we will be using an Ewrap stitch. So we're going to start with this upper one. So I'm going to wrap around to where it twists. If I started my cast on here, I would put my slip knot right there. I'm going to come down to the lower portion and go to the second peg. And we're going to come around in between the next 2 pegs that we're going to be going. So the direction we're going. So I'm going between the 2 and the 3 and wrap it around like a little E wrap, cursive E, and go up to the 3rd peg on the upper portion and go between the peg that I'm going to wrap and then the next one. Wrap around and make that E wrap, and then come down to the 5th peg, or sorry, the 4th peg on the lower board. So we're picking up all the even stitches on the lower board and the odd stitches on the upper board. And the only difference between this and the Classic is the fact that it's E wrapped. So come all the way down till we get to the 12th one, or wherever you decide to stop, and then you're going to go around to the inside peg here, and then twist around to pick up. So let's work this again. So I'm going to come down, pick it up at the last stitch, okay, and we're going to come straight across in the direction we're going to be going, which is we're going to be going back in this direction. So we're going to go up, and then I come around the outside, and then go down to this board here and twist around. So everything's still twisting around in that Ewrap stitch fashion. And then it ends on this lower left, which is the number 1 peg. And then you're just going to lift up and over. And you're going to work left to right, and then right to left. Just working towards the center. Vary your center, and then do your backboard or upper board. Okay, and then just push that down, and you've ended where you began, and you would wrap exactly the same way. So 2 passes in order to do 1 row. So now we're ready to do the stockinette figure 8, and this one is a twisted stockinette, and all of the stitches are going to line up. This one has a slip knot. Okay, so if you want to do a twisted brioche, which is what this actually is, this is what we're going to be doing. So this is where you would start your slip knot on this top part, and you're just going to ignore this stitch. You're not going to be having an extra wrap on it. I'm going to go down to the first stitch down below, and we're doing all of our wrapping in order. Okay, I'm not skipping any pegs. I'm going to go around and twist it, and then go up to the next peg that's not wrapped, number 2, twist it, go down to the number 2 peg on the bottom and twist it, and continue twisting. And if you can see the portion down below, this is matching the exact way that all of my pegs were wrapped previously. Okay, and you can see I end on this right side over here down at the bottom. And then knit over, working to the center, and then start at the other side on the front, work your way to the center, and repeat on the back. And where your slip stitch began, you will not have any wrap on to knit over. Okay. Push it down, and the next row is going to work in the opposite direction. You're still skipping this first one and E-wrapping across. Just repeat to get this stitch here that you can't see through, and you see that purl stitch behind it, and it'll have that nice wrapping. And look at the back, and it looks almost identical as that. So this produces a nice stretchy fabric. Okay, this one is the stockinette twisted figure 8. So it is a twisted stitch or a modified figure 8 wrapping pattern. It does not line up. So when we want to start it, we actually will go down and pick up the stitch down here, and then go back and pick up our first stitch and wrapping that, and then pick up all the other stitches. And if you look carefully, you will see that it is not lining up with how the stitches previously wrapped. So the stitches lean in this one, lean this way, and after I wrap this, you'll see that they lean this way. You see how the stitches are kind of having this lean this direction? And so that causes that twisting in the fabric, not just the individual stitch. So I'm going to end at the upper right and knit over. Okay, I'm just going to lock that in, and I still like to work my front of my board knitting over first. Left to right, right to left, knitting over. And that makes the front tight. And then when I work the back, it's looser. And it produces this loose stitch here. Okay, so it has that kind of Y-shaped or extra emphasized Y-shaped stitch here. And if you want to make sure that you're always on the correct side, if it's going to be tight on one side and loose on the other, then you might want to mark the front of your board front. And so when you pick it up after leaving the project for a while, it will continue to be the same stitching, and your project won't get messed up like mine has been before. When I first started doing this, it got funny because I had it very tight for 6 inches or so, and then I had a very loose stitch. Work the next row. You're just going to start again by going down to the next stitch and then coming back up and wrapping that stitch again that you came from, and continue in the figure 8 all the way down. Okay, so wrapping the figure 8, it's going to go just like this. And that's it. So continue doing that to get the stockinette twisted figure 8. Let's do the zigzag stitch. The zigzag I really like because it has it uses less yarn than the figure 8, but also if I use the duplicate zigzag, I can get this brioche look here. It looks like it's got the purl stitch behind it. It has that classic V shape, just like the duplicate stitch. So let's go ahead and show you how to do this first one here. It uses less yarn than the twisted figure 8 stitch. You're going to start by wrapping these, and you're going to cross over whatever was wrapped before. So say your wrapping was going this direction the previous row, now we're going to go in that leaning opposite direction. So I'm going to come down here and wrap around this first peg, and then I'm going to go up to the top and make sure I wrap it so that all the ends get the same amount of stitches. So we have 2 wraps on each peg. So I'm going to come down here and go. So if you see the wraps before were headed this way, now I'm wrapping them and they're all headed in this direction. So we've changed directions. Okay, so we come all the way down, just easily wrapping. This is like the easiest one to wrap. We're going to knit over this last stitch and then work all of your loops one over the other. So work right to left, left to right towards the center, and then do the back row. And that will get you this look, because the next row you're going to go around again, and it will cross and start angling in this direction. All right, so let's do the duplicate zigzag, and the duplicate zigzag is going to continue in the same direction that you were going before. So every row is going to still angle in the same direction. We're going to ignore the first stitch and not work that one over at all. So we're just going to go straight down and around the outside and then go up to the next stitch up top. And you're just simply following this patterning here. So you don't have to think about it at all. Just follow the wrapped pattern of the previous row till you get all the way down to the end, and it will be this last stitch. Work all these stitches. And push down. And then if I was to start another one for the duplicate zigzag, I ignore this first peg and go around the outside of my first one on the upper board and then go around. So it's going to continue going in that same direction for my next row, just like that. And then we'll end on the opposite side. So one pass for each row, ending at the opposite end. And that is it. So I hope that you have enjoyed working on your stockinette stitches. Be sure and click down below, type in the comments, let us know which one you liked, and what would you like to see next here on GoodKnit Kisses. Thanks for joining us today, where we help you stitch your love and love your stitches. See you again soon.